Black Veils lecture at Dragon and the Rose, somewhere in Orange County. It's a hidden shop, very dark and very happy. These people look happy. That's not good for vampires. What is the pumpkin's name?
Jack.
Jack the pumpkin cat?
Jack. And his sister is Sally, right over there.
Well, Sally. Hello.
Came dressed for the occasion.
Okay. Greetings, everyone. I'm Father Sebastiaan. I'm the Impresario of the Endless Night Vampire Ball and Master of Fangsmith of the Sabretooth Clan and founding father of the New York vampire community. And I've been in the vampire community since my mother told me all about Anne Rice and how she didn't like Tom Cruise being Lestat, which we forgot about because she actually endorsed it. So the vampire has defined my life, and I have written several books, including Sanguinomicon, Vampire Magic, and now I've just released Black Veils, which is accumulation of, it's basically a reboot of all my work. The main thing that I really firmly believe in is the vampire mythos as an archetype. And the vampire mythos is very much a very big part of mythology. And there's three main influences on the vampire mythos: Bram Stoker's Dracula, Anne Rice and the Vampire Chronicles, and Vampire the Masquerade, the role-playing game, which just is releasing its 5th edition. So if you want to know about those three influences, go check them out. They're very interesting because they have 3 different perspectives. Anne Rice is very homoerotic, and that was like a reboot of the vampire mythology for the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and oubliettes in the teens of the 21st century. Now, there's also Bram Stoker's Dracula. If you've seen the movie, raise your hand if you've seen the movie Bram Stoker's Dracula. Excellent. Okay. Bram Stoker's Dracula, for me, was one of my favorite movies. It's one of my top 10, after Vampire in Brooklyn. But don't tell everybody, okay? Eddie Murphy's the best vampire I've ever seen. all my Lost Boys fans are going to probably kill me for that. But the vampire mythology began, and I'm going to read a passage from Black Veils for you guys. Could you guys just make sure that that camera is, like, even? We're
Perfect.
Good? Okay, so would someone mind monitoring the chat? You're going to be helpful. You can just put a chair there and see what people are saying.
Spare level for me. Oh.
Okay. The vampire mythos. And Black Veils comes from, this book is actually from the code of conduct, and it started as a code of conduct for a nightclub in New York called Long Black Veil and the Vampire Lounge, which was basically the center of the East Coast vampire community. And Jack Strauss's, who sadly just passed away in May, he was the king of vampires in Los Angeles, co-king with Alejandro, the Fangsmith, and they were great friends. They got along great. I hope no one saw that. And on the the vampire community, I'm going to get into the history year by year for the actual lifestyle vampire community and what it was like beforehand. But I think we should start with the vampire mythos. Now, Black Veils are each one page. It's a lexicon, okay? And the vampire mythos is what I consider one of my favorite veils. And here we go. The vampire mythos is defined in the Black Veils as the collective impact of all the legends, film, literature, fantasy, and mythology related to the vampire from all time periods. From ancient times and almost every culture has included some sort of vampire mythological figure in their superstitions and lore, ranging from the Lilitua demons of ancient Sumer to the Jewish myths of Lilith, to the incubi and succubi of medieval lore, to the fairy-like Babon Sith of the Scottish Highlands. I wonder if that's where George Lucas got Sith from. To the Strigoi of Romania, and the bloodthirsty gods of Central and South America, and the ghoulish predators of Asia and Africa. The past myths and legends have collectively given rise to our own modern vampire mythos. One can say that this modern mythos began with the Romantic movement literary work of author John William Polidori in the short story The Vampire with a Y. published on April 1st, 1819, featuring the suave British nobleman vampire character Lord Ruthven. This this new modern view of the vampire was expanded upon in Victorian literature in such as lurid series such as The Penny Dreadful Varney the Vampire from 1845 to 1847, and the Gothic horror of Carmilla in 1871. Then this all radically changed with the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897. From there, the vampire mythos exploded into the mainstream culture in a very refined manner. The vampire mythos can truly be defined and evolved in the 20th century through thousands of incarnations of film, television, literature, role-playing games, Vampire the Masquerade, rock on, video games, merchandise, and even spawned an entire lifestyle subculture. The biggest influences of the past 100 years in the vampire mythos include Bram Stoker's Dracula in the films from 1931, 1958, 1979, and 1992, which is my favorite. Gary Oldman is definitely hot. All of these interpretations have influenced and illustrated what the modern vampire can be: the immortal, aristocratic, angelic anti-hero who is immortal, powerful, and highly social, yet extremely independent. The vampire is a powerful being that many of us wish to become, and can be reflected in our own primal desires, and as a monster that we can relate to and many sympathize with. This is the 21st century modern vampire mythos. Does that give you some things to think about? So how many viewers do we have?
We have 21.
That's a very good start, especially since it's like 1 o'clock in New York. And that's, New York is where I started my Fang empire. I run an event called Endless Night, which is about the vampire mythos and practicality. And it's about expressing the vampire mythos in all its forms. So if you're a role player or a lifestyler or a sanguine or a psi or whatever type of vampire tradition that you identify with, or a black swan, or someone who's just curious about the culture, what's really interesting is that it all really took its form in New York City and Los Angeles and Seattle and London. Those were the cities that it really, really got going in the early 90s. But what really created the vampire subculture, what created the vampire culture, what created the vampire lifestyle, or was able to bring people out of it, was Mark Reinhagen's Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game, the third greatest influence on the vampire world. When I say the vampire world, I talk about all of the genres of vampires. The vampire mythos is the mythos, but the vampire world is the actual place you go to interact. Be it a horror convention, an Anne Rice Ball in New Orleans, an Endless Night event, a LARP, whatever you identify with as a vampire, or whatever you're interested in. So I've divided the vampire community into several tribes, and you can see a video on Vampire World, my YouTube channel, about the different tribes. Now the first tribe is called the Fandom. Okay, and that's ranging from Buffy fans to Anne Rice fans. There's different tribes within that. Okay, and the interesting thing is that the fangdom can be as diverse as some people that like Charlene Harris's Southern Vampire Mysteries, or it could be as hardcore as the Buffy fans, because they are, man, they're in it. Okay. I heard they're making a remake of Buffy, and I heard that there is some significant controversy about that. Role players that play Vampire the Masquerade are their own subculture within the vampire world, but they're part fandom, but they're their own thing. Okay, the Anne Rice fangdom, which is where I started, my mother telling me Tom Cruise was losing weight to be in a movie called Interview with the Vampire, which I actually got to meet Kirsten Dunst in the dress that she wore after she became a woman. You know what I mean? PG-13, guys. Then the second tribe is the scholars. Those are professors or researchers like J. Gordon Melton or Catherine Ramsland, who wrote the Anne Rice Vampire Companion. And a lot of these people are known, like, you know, those experts that are on Ancient Aliens that are like, and it wasn't an alien, but it was possibly an alien. I don't know if it was an alien. Those are the kind of scholars I'm talking about. Okay. Even Dr. Stoker, who is the great nephew, I believe, of Bram Stoker. So we have a whole variety of different scholars specializing in different things, and they have symposiums and groups, and it's very interesting to see how they come down. Now the next group, okay, is the lifestylers. Now lifestylers are just as broad as the fans. You can have some lifestylers that are hardcore into just the fashion. Then you have some lifestylers that are just into the philosophy and whatnot. And lifestylers are the people that dress up. Okay, and some can be hardcore into vampirism as a philosophy and dress up, and some can just be into the philosophy. Okay, it's not a spiritual thing. It's more of like a lifestyle role play, but it's something that they internalize more than just a LARP. Okay, so I'm part lifestyler, I'm part scholar, I'm part fan. I love Anne Rice. I love Buffy. But when we move on to the more interesting elements of the vampire lifestyle, lifestylers can also be sanguines, but they don't have to be, which are blood drinkers. They are people that believe they need to consume human blood to balance their energy. Okay, it's for their health. Okay, now there is no scientific evidence or psychological evidence that this is required at all. However, I have met people who genuinely believe it, so I have to respect that. Okay, for me, blood is a fetish. It's a kink. It's just like you want to dress up like a kitty, or you want to dress up like a bat, or whatever. However, the BDSM lifestyle is very hardcore in the vampire scene. Okay, and not everybody is in the BDSM. Okay, not everybody in the vampire community practices BDSM. However, there is a great respect for people who do, if you're into it. Okay, the predator-prey concept of the vampire mythos actually plays into the BDSM element, the dominance and submission. Okay, so that role play does exist. However, the people that are blood drinkers are known as sanguines. Okay, or sanguinarians, or sanguinarians. There's also a whole variety of different versions of or interpretations of the sanguinarian practice. And a lot of sanguinarians are not lifestylers. They don't want to dress up. They think it's separate. Okay, so you can fit into both categories. Then there's psychic vampires, who are about energy. Okay, and they believe that they have a whole variety of reasons why they take energy. But what's different about them is that's more of a spiritual practice and more of an energetic practice. Okay, so they believe in that they need. The one perspective is that unawakened psychic vampires have to take the excess life force from humans in order to balance their energy because their body doesn't create enough. Okay, a lot of people call that the leaky chakra effect. Okay, however, some psychic vampires, if you want to call it that, okay, actually have a higher spiritual metabolism and they digest life force more on a higher frequency. So they need to take energy, and that's always usually done in a consensual way. Okay, or an ambient way, like you go to a football game and you take the energy out of the crowd, or a nightclub, or a movie theater, or anything. That's called ambient feeding. Okay, the next is surface feeding, which is on the outer layers of the aura. Okay, which is still game, and because it's not something because the aura in many esoteric systems will kind of radiate out like an atmosphere, or kind of peel like a snake. Okay, so what the vampire can do is feed on that excess energy that's being radiated. Because one of the philosophies that I find very interesting about psychic vampirism is a lot of people can say it's parasitic or predatory. In fact, if you look at it like this, you are stardust and your energy was somewhere else. You are a collection of energy starting from your birth or your conception to your death. Okay, so you have a beginning and an end, a portal, and then a timeline or a mortal coil between that. So a lot of psychic vampires are energy sensitives. They are highly spiritual and usually mix magic in with their lifestyle. And they can also be lifestylers. And then you have a hybrid, which is someone who doesn't identify as a sang or psi, only that's just what their feeding preference is. Okay, and I use feeding, I prefer the word gathering energy. Some groups call it harvesting energy. And then the next group, okay, and those are the sang, psi, and lifestylers are the most prevalent in the lifestyle vampire community. Then the next group is the roleplayers. Okay, they play Vampire the Masquerade. It is a game, just like a murder mystery or a medieval LARP, but you identify, instead of like in D&D where you have a character class, you have a different type of vampire for each kind of clan. There's 13 clans, and each clan has its own personality. So your character class is your clan. Okay, and what is interesting is there was a documentary that is being released this fall called World of Darkness. Okay, and I've seen it twice already, actually 3 times. I've seen it in Berlin, New York, and LA. Okay, they released it last year at the World of Darkness Festival, which is the fan festival in Europe for Vampire the Masquerade and the other associated games. And what was very interesting is to watch the history of how Vampire the Masquerade came to be by collecting all the different mythologies into one, okay, and then expanding them out. So, for example, a lot of people see Blade with the different classes, the houses of Erebus, okay? And what I kind of giggle at is that's a direct rip-off of Vampire the Masquerade. The original Blade from the comic books wasn't as cool as Wesley Snipes, okay? He was a very different creature. So Vampire the Masquerade just released its 5th edition, Vampire V5, and the center of the Vampire the Masquerade world is in Stockholm, Sweden, where the new company that owns the game is, and the Los Angeles, where the entertainment business is. And White Wolf Entertainment, which is no longer White Wolf Publishing, is now doing a licensing where they're creating this World of Darkness as a license to go out and explore all the different options from makeup to tabletop games, video games, computer games. And in my opinion, and Vampire the Masquerade has been the largest influence on my life as a lifestyler and a energy vampire. Okay. So when you look at the Vampire the Masquerade's influence, Blade, okay, if you look at the movie with the different houses of Erebus and the way that the characters in the nightclubs and stuff like that, that's Vampire the Masquerade. Okay, then if you look at Underworld, okay, one of the things that I was so desperate to be able to do in the World of Darkness documentary, okay, is say vampires and werewolves hating each other is not real, guys. It comes from Vampire the Masquerade. And that was like the one thing I asked the producers. I was like, I want to make that point in the documentary, and I got to do it. And I was so freaking honored to be like, you know, that's the only part I thought I'd be in it. And then they used me for a couple other things, and I was extremely flattered to be a part of this documentary about the beginnings, origins, history, and future of Vampire the Masquerade. And I look forward to coming out. I don't know where I think it's going to be released on Amazon. And I think it's one of those documentaries that's going to feed through over the years, because you can see it in South America and Europe, but you can't see it here. Okay, they do screenings where you get to buy tickets to a movie theater, and it was like really weird walking into the movie theater, and I see myself sitting on a couch, and I'm like, I'm on a couch on a big screen. That's creepy. And then everybody looked at me at the same time, and I was like, and I've never turned whiter in my life. Okay, I was like, so I hate watching myself on TV. So World of Darkness and is the collective universe of the 5 different IPs or intellectual properties of the White Wolf's game universe. And they've had a very famous game called Bloodlines, Underworld's battle between the werewolves and the vampires actually was a direct ripoff of Vampire the Masquerade. The vampire style that they had was Vampire the Masquerade. Okay, and V5 changes and breaks that structure. Okay, V5 just was released at Gen Con at the beginning of August. Of course, I saw a copy before. But what's great about it is it brings the World of Darkness into the modern nights. Okay, so I'm really excited about that. So one of the things that Black Veils does is it acknowledges all of the different vampire myths and legends as what we call just legends. That's a direct ripoff of Star Wars. You know, the Expanded Universe became Legends. So for you guys that know about Expanded Universe, you know what I'm talking about. And if you're a Disney hater, I'm sorry, but Disney owns it now. And then there's the magical vampires who believe that they need to they're usually like very equivalent to psychic vampires. Some are blood practitioners, and what they do is they take energy to be able to use for magical purposes. Okay, and that's an example of Temple of the Vampire, or another group called the Kemetic Order of Asaka, which is out of They're a very special experience because they believe that Isis is the first vampire.
That's very Akashic.
Well, what's interesting about their theology is that Asaka is a magical tradition, okay, and they believe that Asa which is the Egyptian name for Isis. Mm-hmm. Isis is actually the Greek name, okay, is a darker, more primal version of Isis. So that's why it's called the Kemetic Order of Asaka, the spirit of Isis. And Kemetic means Kemetic, which is the Black Land. Right. Okay, Kem is the actual, the Kemetic, Kem is the actual name of ancient Egypt, okay, which is interesting because the Nile flows north, and I've been on the Nile. It's pretty cool. I got a video of me on a cruise boat, hanging out in the Nile, and the picture of me in front of the pyramids is actually real. It was 2008, I spent New Year's Eve in Egypt. It was pretty cool. I went all the way all around Egypt. It was quite an adventure, but I was on a French tour, and they were getting really technical, and my French is not that good. Okay, so the Egyptian identity of vampires was, ancient Egypt is a very vampiric culture. Okay, the Ka, or life force energy, I'll get into that later. However, Anne Rice was the first person to put the modern vampire mythos into the Egyptian, and Akasha was not Egyptian. Okay, she was actually Persian. She was Iranian. Okay. You know that?
We were just talking about Sumerian gods, like literally Mesopotamian gods, literally like 15 minutes before you
That's
got
a
here.
Temple of the Vampire discussion.
Yeah.
So those are the basic tribes of the vampire lifestylers, culture, and community. Okay, and then you have some people like to dress up, and what I'm getting to is that the vampire mythology is this incredibly diverse interpretation. It can be science fiction, it can be horror fantasy, it can be horror. Okay, I mean you've got probably 1,000 vampire movies and an unlimited number of things. And today, we are at the verge of the biggest era of the vampires. There's, I think, about 10 major television shows coming out of vampires, including Hulu has just picked up the Vampire Chronicles, which is fuck yeah. All right, we want Lestat to be Lestat, 6'3" tall French guy with a French accent. I got to walk in the footsteps of Jim Morrison and Lestat when I lived in Paris for 8 years. That was quite a beautiful experience. Now, what also is interesting about the vampire mythos is not only is it very morphable, and it's becoming one of the golden ages, the golden age of the vampire mythology is coming, is because of these 10 TV shows. And it really what's cracking it is Vampire the Masquerade. Okay, the role-playing games mythology. If you heard of Cain being the first vampire, that comes from Vampire the Masquerade. If you heard of clans of vampires, that comes from Vampire the Masquerade. If you heard of generations of vampires, that comes from Vampire the Masquerade. Okay, if you heard the word Malkavian, Toreador, Ventru, Jamisi, La Sombra, or the Camarilla, or a secret society of vampires, that was popularized by Vampire the Masquerade. Those clans that I just talked about were actually clans or bloodlines in the Vampire the Masquerade world. In 2004, they released, I think it was 2004, they released a sequel, a re-envisioning called Vampire the Requiem, and that didn't last very long, maybe about 10 years. But I like that game. It's pretty cool stuff. And then in the same universe, the World of Darkness, you have Vampire the Masquerade, and then you have Werewolf the Apocalypse, and it's werewolves being warriors of Gaia, protectors of the world, and the vampires are the evil ones, and they hoard them in the cities and then pick them off if they try to travel around. That's why vampires and True Blood is a direct rip-off. It was actually Charlene Harris was doing a tabletop Vampire the Masquerade game. That's where she got the fairies and werewolves and all that stuff come from the kings. They had princes. Okay, the sheriff is a direct rip-off of vampires. There's even a scene where the guys are talking about the first vampire being Cain, who, killing Abel, got adopted by Lilith and turned into a vampire. So is Lilith the first vampire, or is Cain? I go with Lilith. So the vampire mythology is also before Polidori, okay? Before, who was also Mary Shelley, hanging out with Mary Shelley, which wrote Frankenstein. Before that, the vampire was one of probably the most diverse creatures you can imagine. In fact, in one country like Malaysia, or Asian vampires were very different. Like the Chinese vampires would hop, and you would throw rice at them, and they were so kind of like OCD, they would stop and start picking and collecting the rice. Okay, and they had multiple rows of fangs, like the movie London After Midnight. So when you look at all these different vampire mythologies and whatnot, we have our own modern vampire mythos. And it seems to play over and over and over based on Dracula or Lord Ruthven. Okay, Anne Rice brought the homoerotic angelic vampire who was an atheist into things. Then she decided to become a Memnoch's best friend with book 5. Which confused me. But I got to go to the Memnoch Ball in New Orleans in 1995, which I can say, my sponsors, that was better than any event that I've thrown. Okay, and I only try to live up to that event. It was at St. Elizabeth's Cathedral. That was my first vampire ball. And it was St. Elizabeth's Orphanage in New Orleans, in the Garden District. And this was this enormous building. There were 6,000 people in the building, Victorian dancers, rooms full of dolls, brewed beer, carriages, and all the fans were outside waiting for, and this was the year after Interview with the Vampire came out. So the energy was really intense. And what happened was, down the street came these horse-drawn hearses, 2 of them. And one stops in front of the gates, and these kind of like, Addams Family, like pallbearers come out and pull the coffin out. It was one of those hexagonal coffins. And they put it up against the gate, and they put another coffin up. Okay, and everybody's like, "What's going on?" And then all the fans were kind of cleared away from the gate because it was this. The Garden District is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my life. And they pull off the lid of the coffin, and Anne Rice is like this. It's like, I fanboy out the hell out. I mean, when I meet Anne, I've been to a bunch of her book signings. Okay, and she's like, she finally started spelling my name right, and I was like, "Thank you, Anne, you're a goddess." And then I stopped fanboying out, but still fanboying out. And she's awesome. She's a wonderful. She knows how to work her fans. Okay, because she's a fan of her. She has her vision, and she loves her fans. Then she comes out and she greets the audience, and the audience is going insane. 6,000 fans, all right, going nuts. A year after Interview with the Vampire came out, this was, I think, the greatest moment of her career. Okay, Memnoch the Devil's out, where Lestat's hanging out with the devil. And then the other coffin. She opens the coffin, and Kirsten Dunst comes out. Okay, and I'm just like, I'll never top this experience. And I swear to this day, of all the supernatural stuff I've done, okay, all of the adventures I've had, that moment was the defining moment of my vampire experience. It was wild. I mean, just the roar of the audience. It's like seeing an actual good Star Wars movie when it first opens. Okay, with a bunch of fans at the Ming Chinese Theater. Okay, all right. If you haven't noticed, I'm a Star Wars fan. So that's kind of a rundown of the vampire mythology. Now, what Black Veils as a book's job is to do is not dictate what a vampire is. Okay, it's to challenge and inspire the vision. Okay. Vampire the Masquerade definitely has an influence on it, because back in the 90s when I was playing Vampire the Masquerade, I was looking for something that was more spiritual and more lifestyle. Okay, bless you.
Thank you.
Gesundheit, Teshue. And I love the game. I love the mythology, and I am still to this day a devoted fan of that mythology. Okay. But one of the things that I wanted was something that was more tangible. And I had a girlfriend named Luciana. She looked at me and she's like, "I want to live this, but legally." And I was like, "What do you mean legally?" She's like, "Well, I've been reading these books from the Temple of the Vampire." And I was like, "All right." And now the Temple of the Vampire books were given to me when I was in, I think I was 15? By a gentleman at the New York Renaissance Fair in Tuxedo. Okay, this is a very big, kind of like holy land for me. And what happened is I love the dark side of Star Wars. I loved everything that had to do with the dark side of things. And I would be like the evil Luke Skywalker, where I take Darth Vader's lightsaber when we were a kid, you know, the ones that were flashlights, okay? And they had the long, cheap tube. And not these new ones you get at Comic-Con that you can beat the hell out of each other on. And I would be the dark Luke Skywalker, going to the Sith, okay? So, one of the things that this mentor that I had met was a member of the Temple of the Vampire. He was, I think, either a priest or a sorcerer. Okay, and for historical references, he asked me never to reveal his name. I call him Dimitri. Okay, and he was actually Romanian. He was a giant dude, like 6'3", with a big fro. Okay, I don't know any Romanians with afros, but he had a freaking afro. Okay, and a big burly beard. And he worked at all the different tents and stuff like that. And I don't want to get into more detail because he has to be private. But he gave me the Vampire Bible and the Vampire Predator Bible before I discovered Vampire the Masquerade. And there were Xerox copies. I'm like, I'm going to take this seriously? Okay. And when I read them, I thought they were like Fruit Loops, you know, like undead gods and the apocalypse and everything like that. But however, I read between the lines, and the Temple of the Vampire has a phrase: within lies fact and fancy, truth and metaphor, discriminate with care. Which, otherwise, read between the lines. Okay? And the Temple of the Vampire, historically, if you want to go into the occult community, is anybody interested in hearing about that? Okay. So, let's go into the history of the vampire subculture. Okay? Now, I hear rumors that my coven started in 1993 or 1991 or 1975. There is a legend of a Luciferian organization in the 1977s by Jean-Paul Boudier, and he had for about a year he had a Luciferian vampiric coven that worshipped Lilith. Okay. However, there was the first actual organization dedicated to the vampire magic or lifestyle or identifying as a vampire and saying I am a vampire is the Temple of Set's Order of the Vampire. They are the first one that I've discovered. Okay. Now I have people disagreeing with me, and I'm sorry, but there's no evidence whatsoever. Prove it to me, and I'll agree. Okay. Challenge me on my history, and I will definitely agree. Maybe there was individuals. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who wrote Vampires Among Us, I believe that came out in 91.
Yeah.
Okay. She investigated the vampire subculture, and there was no organizations besides Order of the Vampire. And then 1988, okay, who we know as Magister Nemo from the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey's organization, who I believe, according to legend, was a member of the Temple of Set and ran Cthulhu Pylon. Pylon's like a local organization for the Temple of Set. Now, for those of you who do not know what the Temple of Set is, they're a break-off group of the Church of Satan that wanted something more magical and actually having a religious status, okay, and not be an atheist organization. They're left-hand path, okay, which means that I am you become immortal instead of merging with the deity, okay. The self becomes immortal, okay. That's left-hand path in the best way to say, and it's self-deification or apotheosis. All right, well, Christianity is right-hand path, and Wicca is right-hand path. Okay, and it says, come to me and live forever, which means merge with me, okay, and lose your identity. All right. So, self-survival, left-hand path practitioners, especially the Temple of Set, have various different orders that represent different interests, like the Order of Leviathan, the Order of the Trapezoid. And if you look at the structure of the Temple of Set, they chose Set over Satan, okay, because it was an older entity. And Set is the red god, the god of the desert, while the main gods of Egypt are the black gods of like Isis and Anubis and all these, because the soil in the Nile is black. It comes from the volcanic ash from the center of Africa, and the Nile runs north into the Mediterranean. It's one of the few actual rivers that runs north. So what happens is that they wanted, in the conclave of 1983, which is their annual event, which they use the word conclave. It's not just the Vampire the Masquerade term, which is actually a Catholic voting system to get the Pope in office. identification of the vampire was announced by Lilith Aquino, who was Michael Aquino's a magister from the Temple of Set, who was the high priest for a while. Temple of Set and Church of Satan have this big controversial relationship. It's like one family of two different branches. Okay, and he announced that they were going to start the orders, and the pylons would be local chapters, like kind of like, you know, town halls or forums, and the orders would be specializing in different forms of left-hand path perspectives. And the Order of the Vampire was that. From what I heard, Nemo was the head of Cthulhu Pylon out of Seattle, or Lacey, Washington, and my research says that the Cthulhu Pylon had the same P.O. box as the Temple of the Vampire. Okay, that is not confirmed, but that's what I heard, and that's what my research has kind of hinted at. Lacey Washington was the head of the Cthulhu Pylon. And then he left the Temple of Set, and he decided to write the Vampire Bibles. Or his grandfather wrote them, or some mythology behind it. I'm not going to try to... I respect the mythology around organizations. It defines and helps the experience of the psychodrama that goes along with theatrical magic. Okay, you need theater and you need psychodrama in magic. Okay, to help shape belief. So, the Temple of the Vampire, the Bibles were written in 1988, and they were released as the Temple. The outer group was released as the Temple of the Vampire in 1989. Okay. Now, in the Temple of the Vampire books, they talk about a thing called the Truth of the Lie. Okay, which is basically the Vampire's Masquerade, a secret society of undead gods that rule the world, the Camarilla. Okay, so there are parallels in that period of time, but Vampire the Masquerade is a game, and a lot of people thought it was real back in the 90s. I mean, how many Bruja and Ventru and Toreador I met. Okay, people that really think it's true. Okay, it's a game. And Temple of the Vampire is a religion. And metaphysically, people can disagree with me about organizations that charge money to be members, okay, but they got to pay their way. All right, an organization has to, and the Temple of the Vampire is the first, and I believe the only registered church that's dedicated to vampires in the world that I know of. I could be wrong, but maybe somebody will register. I know there's nonprofit organizations. Vampire the Masquerade comes out in 1991. Okay? It takes the gaming world by storm because it's about storytelling. And chicks played. There was actually females playing role-playing games. Could you believe that? You know, like today, there's girls playing D&D all the time. Okay, I remember when I was playing D&D, all right, I kept it in my basement. I didn't tell not one young lady at school because I would not be talking to women if I played D&D. Okay, because it was a social stigma. Okay, you've seen Stranger Things. That's what I was when I was 14. I was one of those geeky kids playing D&D. Okay, but I'll tell you, we had some great games. Okay, and I played all sorts of different role-playing games. So I got into the LARP. I loved the LARP. I know it sounds like an STD. Okay, all right. That's what I was told because I used to run a magazine called LARP. And because my dad wouldn't let me go to games, so when I was 16, I wanted to be involved in the LARP community, and I read in Dragon Magazine 109 about live role play. And I released a magazine called LARP, and I sent it out to all the LRP groups, and they sent me letters back saying, it sounds like an STD, okay, please stop using that stupid name. And I should have trademarked it. So, or I got the domain name in '94 when domain names came out. Okay. That's the biggest fuck up of my life. Okay. I got into the Vampire the Masquerade games through the live action medieval games, and one day a woman came up to me. I was playing a game called Zenadri in Pennsylvania with a bunch of the Ren Fair actors. And I was a lich, and I was throwing fireballs and doing my evil thing, and I had these two death knights that were actually the knights from the New York Ren Fair, and I was like, 17. I was like, yes. And I had an arch enemy, okay, who was this woman that was hunting undead because she was full of life because she was a woman. Okay, she goes, you got to kill me by noon on Saturday because I'm going to this game in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania called Vampire the Masquerade. And this was, I think, 92, 91. Okay, and I'm like, what is that? And she's like, think of Anne Rice, but cooler. And I was like, how can you get cooler than Anne Rice? Because I read the Anne Rice vampire novels and read the Temple of the Vampire books when I was, 14 or 15. And I wanted to go, and I didn't get to go to the game. I was like, dude! And that was the very first live-action Mind's Eye Theater Vampire the Masquerade game. So between 92 and 95, the Vampire the Masquerade world was a very interesting place because it was all theater actors. There was girls that played. Can you imagine girls playing a role-playing game? It's unbelievable to me, this world now. I wish I was 15 now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to Comic-Con. We were like, you got beat up if you were a Star Wars fan. Okay, at my age. I was reading the Silmarillion from Lord of the Rings, okay, when I was 15 at high school, and I got thrown in a garbage can. Okay, so I had to hide my books like they were like heretic books. Lord of the Rings, you read Lord of the Rings, or you played D&D, you were like an outcast from society. Okay, and now today it's on Stephen Colbert. So, we're coming to 1992 when Vampire the Masquerade was really hot. It was a storytelling game, a personal horror, where you are the vampire. I was just quoting Mark Reinhagen, the original. He in the documentary, he goes, you are the vampire. All right, I love that scene. And then, at that time, there was Vampire the Masquerade, a couple people that were drinking blood, the Temple of the Vampire, and a bunch of zines. Okay, like the Transylvania Society of Dracula. Okay, and we're coming up things, and then the vampire world got really interesting. The role players divided into two groups, the lifestylers and the role players. Okay, and AOL, and then in steps Father Sebastiaan. Okay, this 19-year-old dude with blonde streaks, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, where the hell are the vampires? And I met these like old school vampires in the East Village, and New York was a center for it. We had Tony Sokol's Vampire Theater, we had the Bank nightclub, the Limelight, we had a club that just was a t-shirt, I don't even know if it existed, called Club Vampire. Okay, and on Christmas Day, 1994, excuse me, I sat my mom down, and I said, Mom, I've been working in a dental lab for the last 3 months, okay, part-time. Can I make you a pair of fangs? And she goes, what? And I'm like, Mom, you introduced me to Anne Rice. You can be my Gabrielle. And she's like, oh yeah, that's Mom. Make me fangs. So I made my mom fangs on Christmas Day, and then I had finally perfected my art as my basic set of fangs, and then I just went nuts in 1995. I was making fangs, I went to the Anne Rice Memnock Ball. That was probably one of the best years because it was new and fresh. I remember going to New Orleans, there was 25 Fangsmiths in New Orleans at that time. And people on Thursday and Sunday would rent mansions in the Garden District, and there was like 40 parties to go to. Okay, you would just like, I went into one woman's house, I forget her name, but if you see Shadow of the Vampire, she's the dominatrix. Okay, by John M. Marcus, the book Shadow of the Vampire, about the Anne Rice fans.
Yeah.
And oh my God!
Elisande.
What's that?
Madame Elisande?
Yes!
Yes!
Yes, that's her. You are old school, girl! Okay. And walked through the French Quarter. I remember I was staying, who's seen Interview with the Vampire? Raise your hand. Okay, remember the end where Louis was walking to that theater? Where he saw Superman? Not spoilers, because everybody's seen it. If you're watching my YouTube channel. I stayed in a little place. So how I got invited to the Memnock Cooks. You couldn't go if you weren't a member or invited. Okay, this was the hottest vampire ball in history. Okay, you can go on YouTube and look up Memnock Ball and just see some of the videos. Your mind will be blown. I was there. I can never get that high again. I'm like a heroin addict with this event. Okay, you know, heroin's supposed to be that thing where like you do it once and you're like always trying to get that high, chasing the high. I'm chasing that high through my whole life. Okay, so in June of that year, I was trying to go to, and I met this girl named Sally who looked like Wednesday Addams, but a little older. more mature. She worked for Roadrunner Records, and she's like, "Do you want to come to New Orleans and go to the Memnock Ball with me?" Okay, and I'm like, I was at the Dark Shadows Festival in June of 1995, and I'm like, you are a hot older woman. I will do whatever you say. Okay, and we went, and we had a freaking blast. And then I got to work at the House of Shock, Pantera's haunted house. She got me backstage there, and we were beating jocks up, Okay, but that's another story. Revenge on the jocks, and Columbine changed everything. So I was in New York, and I swear I was the king of the vampires in New York. Okay, Vampire the Masquerade was awesome. We were still doing the LARPs, and I was like, I'm gonna run a fucking vampire ball. Okay, I want to run one in New York, and we ran it in January 1996, and we had 700 people. I'm like, I'm on to something. And then I just exported it around the world, and today I live in LA after living in Dubai, Paris, New York, Berlin. Tried Barcelona, but that didn't work out because there's too many ferries there. I got to live all over Europe, and I opened a nightclub in 1997 called Long Black Veil, and that's where the Black Veils comes from. It's actually from the Chieftain's song, Long Black Veil, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the content of vampires. So the original Black Veils, how Black Veils came to be. Okay, I just gave you a whole bunch of information about the vampire world. Is everybody sated with that? Okay, do you know more than you knew before you got here? Okay, I think a lot of people here have learned some things as well. Okay, I've done this lecture like 10 times. All right. I threw the vampire ball at the Bank nightclub. I had Voltaire, Empire Hideous, and a DJ named Ian Ford. We had a red carpet. I had this guy made like coffins that you could sleep in, and like had radios and CD players and like, air conditioning and coffins for two and stuff, coffin beds. The vampire world was awesome in 1995. I'm coming back from the high of going to the Anne Rice Ball. I was like, oh yeah. Then Susan Walsh disappeared. She was investigating vampires in East Village, or so the story went. The media jumped on it. Right after that, I threw a vampire ball at the most beloved place for vampires in the world. At 660 6th Avenue, the Limelight. If you ever seen the movie Party Monster, that's where I started making fangs, right next to Michael Alec.
Wow.
Okay. I was running Vampire the Masquerade games and Temple of the Vampire rituals in the back rooms of Limelight from 94 to 97. Okay. That building defined my life. 20th Street and 6th Avenue. It's now a gym and a really nice restaurant and a Grimaldi's Pizza. But I go in there and I tell the people in the hair salon, this used to be my office! And they're like, it's like, do you know Michael Alec? I'm like, yeah, kind of. I haven't seen him since 95. And they're like, you knew him then? And I'm like, I keep clear. So what happened, and to this day, I still host dinner parties in the restaurant in there, where I'm hosting one on the 19th of October in that place. Right after this vampire ball I threw, Peter Gatien, the guy with the eye patch in the movie, rented me the club for $250 and then gave me the money back and told me to go to Kinko's and print flyers. Printed 500 flyers and handed them out. 2,700 people showed up on a Tuesday night. Some people claim that Susan Walsh was there and this was the last night she was ever seen. I don't know if that's confirmed because I was pretty busy in the DJ booth trying to make sure all the bands didn't explode. Okay. The next day I get a phone call from a woman by the name of Kitty Boots, and she would like to invite me to a dinner at a diner called Hell in the Meatpacking District on 15th Street in Washington. And her name was Empress Chi-Chi Valenti. The Queen, the Empress, the one and only of the Imperial Drag Queen Court of New York. and her husband, Johnny Dynell. And they ran a party called Jackie 60. So I'm like, I get an audience with the Empress. So I put my fangs on, I get my hair all ready, because I had blonde streaks in my hair back then. It doesn't look as good at my age. And Kitty Boots was waiting at the front of this bar, and I walk in, and I go through the thing. The place was probably about as big as this, and there was these red Chinese beads, and Kitty Boots just holds her arm up, and there's Chi-Chi behind the beads, smoking one of those long filtered cigarettes, okay, with a beeswax hairdo, all right, in this beautiful dress. She was probably in her early 40s at the time, and she goes, "How would you like to be my vampire son?" And I was like, "Mommy." Yeah, mommy. And she's like, "You don't even know the offer yet. I'm about to open a club called Mother. Okay. We open in the fall, and I'm going to start weekly events. And one of these events is going to be called Long Black Veil and the Vampire Lounge." And I'm like, "Where do I sign up?" She's like, "Here's your job. You need to write a culture for the event. You've already been doing this, but I want a culture. I want theatrics. I want performers." So I thought Victorian vampire BDSM, and I'll tell you, to this day, that club defines the vampire culture of the world. Because it wasn't we had the LARPs, but it wasn't focused on that. Everyone was welcome, as long as you were in black, or at least look like a part of a vampire mythology. We had so many adventures from March, the second Wednesday of March in 1997, to June of 2000 when the club closed. 2000, we had several rooms. We had the Versailles room, which was a lounge room. The bloodbath drink was invented by our bartender Ambrosia. Okay, that everybody drinks around the world. Who has had a bloodbath here? Okay, if you've had a bloodbath, it comes from her. She lives in New Mexico now. She's a Native American, okay, from the Winnebago tribe up in Milwaukee. And it's really sexy to hear her say Milwaukee. I found her at a bikini bar right outside of, she was in a bikini bar, which is now a Taco Bell, on 32nd Street and 8th Avenue in Manhattan, right south of Madison Square Garden. I walked in and I fell in love with her, and I'm like, please. She had a leather corset on, a Betty Page wig, and she was like, she had fangs. And I'm like, I had made you fangs. I actually met her before, but I'm making so many fangs. And I begged Chi-Chi to hire her, and Chi-Chi was like, of course she made me work for it. Oh. Okay, and Ambrosia became our alchemistress, and she invented the bloodbath. And that was famous by De Drennan, who was the PM De Drennan, was the creator of the Legacy Ankh. Okay, there's so much more to the story that I want to tell you guys. Okay, my adventures in Europe, okay, exploring caves with vampires in Santorini, Italy, Santorini, Greece. There's a timeline in this book, and this is the first in the book series. Okay, there's a lot of controversy about this book, okay, because it tells the truth. I have gone through all of my previous texts, and I put it all together into one place. And what's great about the Black Veils is they're all words of power. They're not degrading or disrespectful. Like, for example, secrets or seduction or sacrifice or rock and roll, the potential, passion, otherkin, nobility, nightclad, names. All of these ideas started at Long Black Veil. And Long Black Veil affected the vampire community in a more subtle way than Vampire the Masquerade. We had a coffin, we had DJ Lestat, and I'm going to tell you, Lestat, the biggest dreaded black guy I've ever met in my life, could move like make Vanilla Ice and MC Hammer look like amateurs. Okay, he was also a very talented DJ, and he was also really named Lestat. That was his real name, and he was to this day he's one of my top 5 favorite goth DJs. But he got married and his wife will let him out. And he was a strip club DJ, and we brought him on board. And what is very intriguing about Lestat is his real name is Lestat, and he was born in 1967. So he was a vampire DJ named Lestat 8 years before Lestat came out in Interview with the Vampire. What a coincidence. I think not. Long Black Veil evolved into Endless Night Productions, which I got the name from Anne Rice's novel. Not Anne Rice's novel. I got that from the same poem that Jim Morrison got the name for The Doors. And the result was, some are born to sweet delight, others are born to endless night. There's 2 lines, I believe, below. The doors of perception are always open. I'm obviously a Jim Morrison fan. So the vampire world is about to explode. And I'm going to give you one homework assignment if you haven't. And if you all raise your hands to this, I'm going to give you another homework assignment. Okay. Here's your homework. If you take this too seriously, no matter how cool it is, how intriguing it is, if you don't have a sense of humor and you haven't seen the greatest vampire movie in history, What We Do in the Shadows, okay, that's your homework. Who's seen this movie? It's about a bunch of vampires living in a house in Wellington, New Zealand.
No, I haven't.
Okay. It's going to be a TV show on Fox, and it is the funniest movie ever. It's a mockumentary about,
Oh my gosh.
you got to see this movie.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't see any vampire movies for the rest of your life, see What We Do in the Shadows.
Okay.
Okay, it's the fangs are great. Okay, and Vladovich, the torture club kid vampire. I mean, it's just literally you're on the floor laughing the entire film. Okay, and the thing about the vampire world, and if you take something as empowering as the vampire mythology, okay, and you can be, I believe everybody should be a king or queen, okay, and define themselves according to that. There should be no. Everybody should be challenging themselves and working for their own things. Black Veils actually goes under the self-help category because it's not fantasy. It's real. Okay? Vampire the Masquerade's an incredible game. What We Do in the Shadows, the mythology, it shows the diversity of the vampire culture. Now, I will say that I drew upon many sources. I drew upon Vampire the Masquerade. No lie, no bullshit. Okay? A lot of people said that the Black Veils are like the Masquerade. Well, of course. Okay, but it was a code of conduct for a nightclub, and the official rules were 18 to enter, 21 to feed. Okay. Wear all black. Okay, which now Cloak and Dagger's doing, and I'm like, shit, I gotta add red and pink and shit. Deep red and dark pink. If there's a color called dark pink, but the result of the vampire world and the ability to contribute to it is something that I'm greatly honored to have this privilege. It's really, truly defined my life. The Black Veils are really something that is tangible and original. Okay, you'll go through there and you'll read a Black Veil and you'll be like, holy crap, I didn't think that vampires played sports before Twilight. Okay, all right. I used to wear my fangs when I would play polo. Okay, and you know, I grew up in Dubai part of the time. Okay, and I spent half my adult life outside of Europe, outside of the United States, exploring the vampire myths of Europe. And the Black Veils are something that, for perpetuity, I am absolutely proud of. I have a vampire fac. I have the history of the Long Black Veil Club by Sir Victor Magnus, my mentor. There's a timeline. Okay, the book is meant to be confusing if you didn't get fangs from me. Okay, but just start with the glossary in the back and the time and the vampire FAQ in the front, and just enjoy each one a day. There's 123 veils. Then I have Vampire Coming Forth by Night, Black Veils Coming Forth by Night, which is coming on Valentine's Day. All right, that will be an esoteric book, but it will be organized slightly different. Then we also have Black Veils Coming Forth by Day, which will be a book about self-empowerment using the vampire archetype in the real world. So I kind of ripped off the pickup artist a little bit and turned that into vampire glamour. I know that, but I got a sociologist that's actually working on converting that into actual real sociology. So that is the story of the vampire world from my perspective. Okay, I'm working on a book about vampire history, and it's all going to be under the Black Veils brand. It's going to be a whole series about the vampire culture. So if you'd like to find a copy of Black Veils, it will be on Amazon on the 15th of September. Okay, you cannot pre-order it. However, you can get copies on lulu.com/Father Sebastiaan with 2 A's. Remember, 2 A's. It's the Dutch spelling. So I'd like to say thank you very much, and if there's any questions, I would like to open them up. I know I've covered every possible base known to man. We will do another workshop on energy work when the next book comes out.
I do have a question in regards to empathy.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to empathy, I know that with psychic vampirism or into levels of psy-vamp or emotional vamp, as some call them, emo vamp, depending on who you talk to, where does the empathic come into play? Because I do know a lot of people that are magical practitioners that are highly, highly empathic, but to a level of almost psychic vampirism. They like take so much energy, they pick up on so much vibe on empathy.
It's called filtering.
Filtering.
Okay, so what I want to make very clear, okay, is before Michelle Bellinger came along, Bellinger as she likes to be called, okay, and she wrote the Psychic Vampire Codex, which in my opinion is an excellent book. It goes into very accurate history, and the metaphysics in there are on point, okay, and I know some of my members are cringing that I'm actually saying something nice, but I'm being objective. Okay, that book is a fantastic book, and I highly recommend that everyone reads the Psychic Vampire Codex. Now, before her, the term psychic vampire was defined by Dion Fortune and Anton LaVey in the Satanic Bible as a parasitic entity. Okay, I fought for a long time that term, psychic vampire, but it became popularized in the vernacular of the modern vampire culture, and even though Sabretooth Clan doesn't promote emotional vampirism, what a lot of people don't realize is that ethical psychic vampires are training to do it properly and safely and honorably and nobly and not be parasitic. Okay, unawakened psychic vampires, or people which I've defined in Black Veils, the new edition, as emo vamps. Okay, because I'm trying to update the terminology, and I feel I've nailed it on the head. Okay, emo vampires are what Anton LaVey is referring to, and I will say that where is it? Emotional vampires. The traditional esoteric, in a traditional occult and esoteric parlance, these traditional psychic vampires are individuals who create negative emotional states in order to psychically drain others of their emotional energy. Temple of the Vampire are not parasitic. Okay, they're living vampires. Oh, hi, cat. I got a pumpkin under my chair table. Temple of the Vampire doesn't practice what would be defined by Anton LaVey as psychic vampirism. Okay, what they do is they go after life force, which is they just don't go for the emotion. Okay. They take the radiated energy of the human body and they digest it and they shift it into magical, and they have their own magical engine, alchemical system for that. Okay. That's living vampirism, but it doesn't seem to register in the brains of psychic vampires and blood drinkers what that means. They just don't seem to understand it. It's like, I'm not in the box, okay, and I'm not, why do you feed? Well, when you don't have a body anymore, your energy signature starts to dissipate. You kind of learn how to do, their techniques are defining on defeating the second death and escaping reincarnation. Okay, and if you were... read the Temple of the Vampire books. They're over a lot of people's heads. Yeah. Okay. They're also in really weird font. Okay, and that was to prevent copying. Yeah. Okay.
I got my copy with a little binder clip. That's how I got mine.
Oh wow, you're old school.
Yeah.
I got them Xerox copies from Kinko's.
It was Xerox, but it was like one little binder clip holding it all together.
I didn't really get those books because I wasn't like I guess, awakened enough to get them until about 96. And then I started practicing, but I was sanguine until about 2002. And what I find that, in their definition, the reason why you don't drink blood is because it's dangerous as hell, okay, and you get one donor, or maybe two donors, and that's a lot of effort to keep them happy, so they give you blood, okay. The problem is feeding on lots of radiant energy means that you, like I was doing an experiment where I was working as a tour guide in New York on the double-decker buses, and I was in Times Square right before the buses were kicked out of the square so they could do the dropping of the ball, and there was 1 million people in Times Square. I estimate, I don't know exactly, but there was probably 1 million people there. And I did an energy draw, and I'm like, I never need to drink blood again. That's called ambient energy, like a shopping mall or a concert or nightclub. Vampires are drawn to cities, okay, because there's lots of human radiated energy. The human energy is what they need. I hear these things about elemental vampires. That's a druid, okay, in my opinion, okay, I'm gonna feed off nature. Of course you're gonna feed off nature. It's called a biosphere. It's called Krebs cycle. You know, vampires are defined by taking life force from other humans. Okay, whether it's blood or anything. For me, sanguine or psi, it doesn't matter. You're a vampire, you're an energy sensitive, you use the energy and you take it for whatever reason. Vampirism is a one-way predatory act. Okay, that's it. And I will admit it, that's feeding. Okay, dressing up and being sexy and playing role play of everything, that's sexy too. Okay, poking a girl on her lip, okay, with a lancet, all right, and kissing her and drinking her blood, it's fucking hot. Okay, it turns me on. It doesn't turn my friends on, some of my friends. Okay, that's fine. But that's not vampirism. Okay, that's kink. Okay, because relying on one donor to be able to feed is nearly going to hurt them. Okay, I have major disagreements with some of my close friends about this. But the great thing about the vampire community, it's incredibly diverse. Okay, and what you'll find in Coming Forth by Night, the next book, is that I acknowledge exactly where I get all the content for my book. I'm highly inspired by the Temple of the Vampire. I'm highly inspired by Michelle Bellinger's work. Okay, she got it down. The Temple of the Vampire got it down. They're very different systems. I tried to find a medium that worked for me. Okay, and then a bunch of the stuff that I've learned from other places. But taking energy, and what I define as feeding is taking life force from another human for your benefit. Okay, communion is when you feed off each other, you cycle the energy. Okay, those are two different processes of energy work. Okay, in Coming Forth by Night, there'll be an entire chapter that will introduce you to feeding, ethically, where to get the energy and how to do it safely. Okay, and it defines sanguine feeding as one type of feeding, a technique, okay, or a process, not the only form of feeding. Now, there's people that claim to be they're sangs or medical sangs. I don't really understand that. It's not my thing, okay? But as long as you're doing it safely, sanely, and not bringing bad mojo to the vampire community because you want to go on TV for 5 minutes, okay, do what you want. As long as you're doing it as consenting adults. A lot of people think I have a big beef with sanguines, okay? And I have, because they go on TV and they drink blood. When I was a vampire back in the 90s and you did that, you don't go on TV. You denied it to every journalist, okay? What changed that was Don Henry on the TV show Mad House, okay? And don't tell anybody, but he was over at my house on Sunday drinking some kava. So, right now, the vampire community is, we have a list of people that we're at odds with, my clan and myself. And we're going through that list and knocking off every person. Not by killing them, but by actually approaching them and trying to come to a healthy relationship. Okay? We might disagree with you, fine. Okay? You might have done some dodgy shit in the past, fine. But the vampire community needs cohesiveness. Okay? It doesn't need people telling other people what to do. Sabretooth does its thing. Sabretooth is a sovereign nation. We're a micronation. We are a family, and we are the second oldest clan in the world. I don't want to hear clans going, oh, we were before Sabretooth. Okay, that's not an accurate factual statement. Okay, prove it to me. Show me an ad in a magazine. Okay, show me something that there's branches of my clan that have left that are actually claiming to be older than the clan. I'm like, where the hell did you get that? Okay, and I'm not going to name names, but I will be straight. That was founded in 97 by me as my personal coven, and they're using that name. That's fine. Go do your thing. Okay, I'm a Sabretooth member. I'm the father of Sabretooth. I've got my council. We do our thing. We're not breaking the law, and we're not involving children. And Sabretooth Clan is not a promoter of drinking blood. Okay? We don't tell people what to do, but if you're caught drinking blood and you go on TV and you're doing it in the name of Sabretooth as an organization, I'm sorry, but you're out. Okay? If you do it in your bedroom with your husband or wife and you're both blood tested and you're being safe, sane, and consensual like in BDSM, okay, do what you got to do. Okay, we don't want to be associated with drinking blood as an organization. Other organizations can do that, individuals can do that, but Sabretooth Clan is not into that. Okay, it's not our thing. Yes?
I know you touched upon it a little bit, and you said that you talk about it in your next book, but when you are feeding off of energy, and as you called it, the ambient energy, is that necessarily always going to be consensual, or is that sort of a, like, maybe if I'm doing this for the highest good kind of thing?
Well, ambient energy is not something you need consent for. Okay, surface energy, outer surface energy, like, you guys are just like, you know how heat comes off a body? You're just breathing it in. Okay, ambient energy is a cloud that's separate from individuals. You got to learn how to filter the emotion out, okay, because you don't want the emotion, you want the life force. Okay, there's a lot of more complex techniques to feeding. Like, I was with at a vampire in Paris, and he was like, check this out. And we went into a meditation, and I could hear carriages going by. I was like, he's like, feed off them 100 years ago. And I was like,
That's residual energy patterns.
no, they're not residual.
It's
We
not
went back in
residual?
time, according to that experience. Now, that's astral projection.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, something that is very important to be aware of. The Temple of the Vampire has a philosophy that I've presented and given them credit for in the beginning of Black Veils. There's dayside and nightside. Okay? Dayside is the tangible reality that we all live in. Paying taxes, health, rationality, reason, all that. The night side, okay, is the esoteric, spiritual, metaphysical. Okay? The vampire separates the two. Okay, my name's Todd in the real world, but my name's Father Sebastiaan in the vampire world. Okay? And the reason why I do that, okay, is because old school vampires use sobriquets or vampire names. And my grandmother gave me a Catholic name of Sebastian. She opened a big Bible, a big book of saints. She's like, when you turn 13, you're going to go and eat this wafer, and you're going to turn into a Catholic. And I'm like, Grandma, you're excommunicated. Okay, but I don't care. I'm Catholic. All right, always a Catholic. Once a Catholic, always a Catholic. And so, what I was born, okay. And one great thing about the vampire thing is you become what you want to become. You define yourself. Okay, and Sebastian is the name I wish to be addressed as. Okay, and that is the name that is dear to my heart. That's what when I look in my girlfriend's eyes and she says, Sebastian, that's what gives me passion. Okay, and a vampire name is very important. I have an actual vampire name that I'm not publicly using, okay, that I use for magic and ritual, and only sacred people can actually know that name, okay, and I've only maybe very, very few people know it, and I just keep that private. So energy, feeding on life force is a night side thing, okay, and it's not illegal even if you're doing it unethically.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't questioning the legality. I was looking at the ethics part of it.
The ethics part of it is that the Temple of the Vampire sees you as food, okay, and you have no right to your life force because you are there to serve them. Okay, well, I don't really see it like that. I see excess energy, you don't need it, thank you. Okay, now deep feeding in the core chakras usually involves consent. Okay, the Temple of the Vampire does not see that as consent. There's no consent. Consent's a big thing today, and the night side spiritual energy, consent is not something that is necessary for the Temple of the Vampire perspective. Does a wolf ask a sheep, can I eat you, please? Okay, does a hunter go to a deer, I'm going to kill you now and turn you into a fillet? Okay, no. Predator and prey are part of nature. And one of the things that the Temple of the Vampire really hits on is that the construct of good and evil has nothing to do with nature. Nature does not see good or evil. It's survive or die. Okay, survive and thrive or die. And the survival of the fittest lasts the longest. You know, the Meg movie, it's like those things have been around for, 20 million years. I think it was 10, 20 million. This giant shark. And then eventually it couldn't get enough food, so it died off. Okay. The lion does not ask the gazelle, may I have you over for lunch? And it will be the end of the things. There was a famous scene in What We Do in the Shadows, where he was like, it is the last night of this person's life. We must make it very special. Okay. So if you see the movie, you'll really enjoy that. Okay. Everyone needs to see this movie, but my mission is to bring the whole, I believe my mission is to set up a nexus for the vampire world to have all of these things. If you're a role player, if you're a lifestyler, if you're a blood drinker, or anything, I acknowledge everyone. And I was very hard, for example, sanguine feeding or blood drinking is a deep feed. There's ambient, surface, and deep. Okay, it's a deep feed. I've gotten connected to people that I'm still connected to for drinking their blood. Okay, I did it until, I've done it with very intimate partners. Okay, I was a little bit more frugal, or a little bit more open-minded about my blood drinking back in the 90s. But the HIV scare freaked a lot of people out, and that's that. So ethically, it depends on your perspective. If you're a primal hunter, no, you have no right to your energy. It's not yours. It's stardust from another planet. Okay? And you're borrowing it for the mortal incarnation that you have. And a vampire can take it and channel it any way they want. Okay? That's the Temple of Vampire perspective. Okay? The New Age, hippie, social justice warrior version, okay, that you're probably referring to, okay, is, may I have your life force, please? Okay, and getting consent. So there's two different perspectives. But either one, most muggles, okay, or mundanes or humans don't believe in life force anyway. Okay, so a vampire's just laughing their head off. Thank you for the energy. And now, one word about psychic vampirism, or emo vampirism, traditional psychic vampirism. I divide them between ethical and psychic. Ethical and traditional. Traditional is what Anton evades, and I define that as emo vampires. Okay, and that's me acknowledging the use of the psychic vampire term as a very common thing as energy vampire in the VC, which I fought for years. Okay, I wanted to call it pranic vampire, but it didn't work out. Emotional vampires are drawn to happy people. Okay, they're drawn to self-help groups. Okay, they're drawn. Teal Swan, which we were talking about before, talked about how psychic vampires. She has her own version of it, which I'm not particularly in agreement with, but it's a very interesting perspective. Okay, when you go to a self-help group and there's a bunch of happy people, okay, pumping it up and amping up, Anthony Robbins, baby, that's a feeding ground for emotional vampires. And they'll hold off as long as they can, and then they'll get you. Okay? Emotional vampires will latch onto you, and here's the thing about it. I'm a freaking target for these people. Okay? They hate my guts. I go on the vampire groups on Facebook, and it's all these parasitic people feeding off each other. I'm like, fuck that. I don't want to be a part of that. You know what I want to be part of? Throwing a beautiful vampire ball in New Orleans. You know what I want to do? I want to dress my girl up and I want to worship her. Okay? I want to dance. I want to do the waltz. And I want to do my energy work. And I want to do my astral projection. Okay? I want to do my ancient history studies. I'm not claiming I'm a 6,000-year-old vampire from ancient Egypt. Okay? That's not practical in today's society. People are going to look at you like a Fruit Loop. Okay, so what's really important to be aware of, and at least from my perspective, is stop claiming a bunch of bullshit and just get down to doing the work. Okay, yeah, I started as a LARPer. I fucking love LARP. LARP's awesome. I'm going to a LARP in Austin in November, and it's going to be a great Sabbat LARP where I'm going to be covered with blood and running around a fucking bonfire. All right, it's role play. It's theater. Everybody role plays. A little kitten girl told me that once. We were sitting in the courtyard of Limelight, and she goes, Sebastian, everybody role plays a little bit. I was like, that's hot. She's like, yeah, it's hot. I was like, thank you, kid. Appreciate that. The kids are a whole different story. Not on the
I was going to say, wait a minute, what about vampires again?
Vampires. Oh God. Have you ever seen the movie Gremlins?
Yes.
That's vampires.
Nice
Okay.
way to put that.
But they're in
That's very
lingerie
eloquent.
and cute.
Yes, and
Okay.
little ears and a big bell. Yeah.
Yeah. Bells?
All yarn. Bell.
Oh no,
Bell.
that's what Shibari rope is for them. Oh come on,
That's it.
kid!
Come on,
Let's
now.
get off the subject of cat girls. All right. Okay. Enough of that. Don't talk about my kinks. Jeez. Talk about vampires. All right. I'm a bad vampire. I'm an evil vampire lord. But the people that are create drama and emotional vampirism feed off each other. Sabretooth Clan wants no part of that. That's why we're neutral in the vampire community. We want nothing to do with bullshit. We have a freaking amazing event called Endless Night. You tell us what we can do to make the event better for you so you get more value for your money. Okay? You come to us and you say, what's that? Sex party? When the hotel is built above the venue, we do. I think that will manifest on its own. Okay?
Everyone on the YouTube just crazy for that.
How many followers do you have?
At our peak, we were at 38. Now we're at about 27.
That's not bad.
That's good.
Any questions? Let's
None really
field
so
questions.
far.
Let's field questions to the studio audience has spoken. Any more questions from the studio audience? I feel like we're on a talk show. Stephen Colbert is awesome. And John Oliver.
I'll let you know I see one.
See, people try to tell me how to, because I'm a public figure in the vampire community, okay, I'm probably the most loved and hated guy at the same time. Okay? You know, yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It's all because I have an opinion. Okay? And I'm supposed to represent everybody. Okay? When I went into the vampire community, before I went to that Memnock Ball, there was no vampire community except the role players. I walked into New York, and there wasn't any. It was a ghost town. There was a couple of vampires that hung out in East Village, but they were just like going to coffee shops and going to clubs. Okay, there's a question.
We have several actually. A lot of them are about when the next vampire balls are coming. And someone asked, are the vampires in New Orleans real? I think that's
Are the vampires in New Orleans real? There's like 70 different groups of vampires in New Orleans, so it depends on which group. I can't answer that directly.
Okay.
When is the next vampire ball? Go to endlessnight.com. Okay, you'll
Okay.
get the list there. And a lot of them are secret. We don't announce all the events. They're invite only. We call inner court and outer court. Endless Night is the world's largest vampire court. We're in Europe and the United States. We have a castle. We have the House of Blues. I mean, we actually have a court and a castle. I mean, I'm not fucking with you. Like, a court and a castle. It's called Bergfinstergrün. It's in Ramingstein, Austria.
And will Endless Night be coming back to New York City?
Yes, October 20th, and we're doing a Long Black Veil reunion. And the official release of Black Veils.
All right.
Thank you. So, what was I talking about before the questions?
We were talking. What were we talking?
Right before the video questions.
Oh my gosh, I totally blanked. Does anybody remember? Because I don't. Nikki?
I was making a point, but I can't remember.
You
what
were
it was.
making a really important. Well, you
Talking
could.
about endless nights and getting feedback and
Okay, we're getting there.
You're
Very
saying
good
that there were no
public figure.
vampires when you went there originally.
Oh,
There was-
no,
yeah.
there was vampires, but there was no community. Okay, there was the secretive temple of the vampire members, which you're not allowed to admit you're a member. Okay, I guess you can now, because it's kind of like Yes. Temple's celebrating their 30th year this year.
Really?
Yeah. So I challenge anybody in the VC, okay, the vampire culture, is I've just redefined it. I went out into the New York City vampire community, and there was no culture. There was the LARPs were their own thing, okay? And I walked in the limelight, and I remember seeing this woman named Otter with a little chihuahua, Betty Page haircut, and permanent fangs, and I was like, I don't need to make you fangs. And I asked her where the vampires were, and she's like, there's no organized community here. Okay. And I realized it was my life quest to make a vampire community. So I started making fangs, and that was my way of networking and bringing people together. Okay, and I networked all the covens, and I created a concept called the Sanguinarium. The Sanguinarium's a concept. It's not as much an organization. I mean, it's a guild of the blood. And sanguine, before the AOL went flat rate, meant in New York, you were of the family. It was the word, my sanguine brother, my sanguine sister. Okay, it didn't mean blood drinker. Okay, that vernacular changed. It's very interesting to watch in your lifetime things evolve. Okay, psychic vampire was a parasitic creature like an emo vamp. That's what you called it. Okay, living vampire was the term that the Temple of Vampire used. Long Black Veil is where all these things really got their foundations. The culture of the vampire world outside of the role-playing game really was defined by Long Black Veil. And that's what the Black Veil's book is for. We have a timeline, a FAQ, we have the glossary of terminology in the back. And if you really, really would like to know more about the vampire world and want a real good primer, that's my intention with this book. I'm also trying to break the stereotypes of the drama and the bullshit that happens in every culture that plagues the vampire community. Okay? Like monarchies. Okay? I'm okay with you calling yourself king or queen wearing a tiara. Okay? All right? You want to be in a high school prom? All right? Or you want to take it really seriously and do it properly. Okay? You can be taken either way. All right? I'm not into, Sabretooth Clan represents, there's only one king and it's King of the North. Okay? I only recognize one, someone said that, we were having a debate about vampire monarchy recently, because there's a vampire monarchies popping up all over the place, telling everybody that they're the lords of the vampire world. And I'm like, come on, dudes. All right?
Oh, man.
Like, I know witch queens and voodoo queens don't act like that. Okay? You shouldn't call yourself king or queen. Okay? Now, mayor, nightmare. That's cool.
That's a good
Okay, nightmare. If you want to be the mayor of your local vampire court, that's cool. I think nightmare is a cool word. Everybody agree?
Yeah, I like
Thinks
that.
nightmare is cool?
Nightmare.
Okay, I vote for nightmare.
That's a good.
And you can vote for him. Okay, isn't that cool? But I do see the romance and the magic. Okay, let's look at the other side of it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's freaking hot. Okay, it's sexy. Okay, there's something about the royalty and the nobility aspect and the aristocracy that is just hot as hell. Okay, and I will give it, but it's got to be done properly. Okay, and it's got to remain a role-playing title. Okay, when you go to an event and you do a ritual or a ceremony or a coronation, that's cool. Okay, but don't go out and try to dominate everybody else and bully them around. Okay, so I think Nightmare is a good option. I don't know if it's going to work, but it's an idea. But Sabretooth Clan recognizes no crown. Okay, and Sabretooth Clan is half the size of the vampire community. Okay, someone asked me how many members we have, and I'm like, I can't tell you, but a lot more than you. Okay, and none of it, and all the people that are slandering me all over the internet, okay, all those emo vamps and people that are like, he didn't found the vampire community, I'm like, okay, whatever, all right. When I was there, I knew nobody. And I took a couple people together and I formed a court called the Court of Gotham in New York. Then I formed the Court of Lazarus. I founded the Court of Lazarus. Okay, a salon noir, which was very different from the Court of Gotham. Both those courts are still active. Almost 20 years later. I'm really honored to see that. I'm actually like, wow, the Court of Lazarus just had like their 205th or 210th, and I have people that go in there and they're still following the same structure that I created for them back in 2000. And I'm really like happy to see that. Okay, as a dad, I'm gonna get along with my kid. Okay, but I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna have the coolest gravestone ever, the best vampire father ever. Okay, and as a father, that's why I chose the title Father over King Sebastian or Lord Sebastian, is because I feel I'm a provider. Okay, I love the vampire world. I love seeing people benefit from my ideas. I love being able to give people a forum where their ideas can benefit other people. Okay, all in the name of the Fang. Okay. So I'm going to leave it here. Okay, if there's any questions or anything, feel free to email me at father@endlessnight.com. I love the vampire world. I share my passion with everybody here and everybody that's watching this video. I'm going to upload this to YouTube on my YouTube channel, and I know there will be controversial issues for people, but you know what? Fine. Trump can get away with it, so can I. Okay? And I'm not Trump. I'm a lot nicer, and hopefully well-spoken, except for a couple
Hair is
curse
so
words.
much better.
What's that?
Your hair is so much
My hair is better than Trump's?
Yeah.
I hope so. Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you do read Black Veils and you enjoy the book. So, can you push the button? Good night, everybody.
The sorceress enchanting from the paladin in trance. In the starlight as we wove us in a web of silk and steel,